taking a minute, so welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us for today's webinar conversation, a continuation of our Webinar Wednesday series, and today we're going to talk about why CAP agencies out in the field should be thinking about engaging in trauma-informed care. So we like to start all of our conversations together, both in person and also via our webinar events, by just taking a minute to center ourselves in the promise of community action. We do this because regardless of our different positions, regardless of our different geological focus areas, this is the one thing that brings us together in our work. And it states that community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. So a little bit about our project on the Learning Communities Resource Center. The purpose of our work is working with CAP agencies such as yourselves who are out there in the field doing a lot of this anti-poverty work, and through a peer-based learning approach, helping you all to identify effective, promising, and innovative practice models that alleviate the causes and conditions of poverty. So to put it kind of in a shorter sentence that'll fit on a t-shirt, we like to say, our job on this project is to help you build your capacity to fight poverty more effectively in your communities. And the overarching goals of this work, outside of just helping you guys to do your jobs better, but really what we're thinking about is these three goals through which we want to do this work. So first, it starts with that practice transformation. So often with this work, it's really helping CAP agencies take a closer look at programs or service delivery strategies that they're already doing, and helping them to innovate in those spaces so that they can increase their impact. Through that work, that then leads to our second goal, which is changed lives. Changing the lives of your participants, of your customers, but also your staff, helping them to feel more empowered and engaged in this work. And finally, overall, that will lead to thriving communities. So if CAP staff are empowered, if participants are empowered, that will definitely lead to more positive and inclusive outcomes throughout communities across the United States. So that's our goals in this work. So a little bit about our focus areas, what we are particularly thinking about this year. We have 4 different learning community groups, actually 5, there's one that's not listed here. But we talk about these different topic areas, and really what I'll say, you can see the different denominations that we're working on there on the screen, but really what we're focused on is helping agencies, like I said, thinking about how to do their work more effectively, but also thinking about how these different topic areas touch on each other, talk to each other, and why it's important for CAP agencies to be mindful of all of these different practices, regardless of the specific focus area that brings them into our groups. And again, this is important, again, not just because we want to reach those goals, not just because we want to help you all do your work more effectively, but also because we're called to do it through our Community Action Network theory of change. Another way that we like to think about the goals of our work is to help you all out there in the field make sure that you can provide those services and strategies that you see listed there in the middle, provide them in an innovative and effective way to help us achieve those 3 goals that we have at the top of the graphic here. So a little bit about our team. I already introduced myself, but we're led in our efforts on this project by Tiffany Marley. She is our Director of Practice Transformation. I already introduced my wonderful colleague, Courtney. Courtney, you can see her there. She is the Senior Associate for Training and Technical Assistance, and you can see her face there. We're also joined this year in our efforts by Lil Dupree. She's another Senior Associate. Liza Porras, she's a Program Associate in the TNTA Department. Kevin Kelly, who's actually our Director of Community Economic Development, and he is leading up our Social Enterprise Learning Community Group this year. And last but certainly not least, we are joined in our efforts by Jeannie Chaffin. She is the former Director of OCS, and she is working with us as a consultant on our Community Action Economic Mobility Initiative, which looks at whole family approaches or 2-generation work in community action. So let's jump into our conversation today. What brought you all here as a part of this webinar event, trauma-informed care. This is a kind of like a buzzword or buzz phrase that you've heard a lot in the human services field over the last decade. And we've had conversations about this work before. We've actually facilitated a learning community group about this specific topic in the past. But just thinking about the context today, what's going on in our society right now and what we're seeing, helping to set the stage for maybe those of you who are just learning about this term or interested in doing more or, need some of that convincing on why this work is important to be able to communicate that to your partners and throughout your organization. We want to really kind of lay that out for you today and engage in a conversation. So again, I'll pause it. If you have any questions or comments as I'm going through any of the material today, please send those in through the chat, and we'll take a minute to pause and answer your questions. So I'd love to hear from you, any of your questions or thoughts. But we're just going to talk today, kind of setting the stage about why this work is important, what trauma even is, and what trauma-informed care can look like in community action. So we're going to jump in, move to the next slide here. So I think it's important to ground our conversations in setting a clear definition of trauma. Again, because it's such a broad and inclusive term, it's kind of hard to zero in sometimes on what exactly this work means. Of course, you want to provide your services to your clients and your customers in a way that's trauma-informed, right? Of course, you don't want to treat them badly. You don't want to do X, Y, and Z, kind of any negative interactions they would have with you. But when we're talking about trauma, we're talking about a really specific instance of any kind of event or series of events, as you see here on the screen, that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functions and physical, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. So that's a very broad term, right? But basically, trauma is any kind of event, series of events or circumstances that someone has experienced in the past, is currently experiencing, or in some cases, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, might even be witnessing someone else experience that has a lasting impact on their physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So let's talk a little bit more about why that's important and kind of to zero in on the context of how this work ties into human services work. So that might seem like a very broad thing, and I know in our practice of service provision, we're used to kind of thinking about a lot of these problems on a direct one-to-one level in a very almost removed way. But I want to start our conversation off by just kind of setting the stage for how pervasive trauma actually is. It's very likely that very many of you that are joining me today have experienced, a traumatic event, or someone that you know or really close to has experienced at least one traumatic event. But it's far and away, as the research is continuing to show, one of the most pervasive and damaging trends that's facing all Americans. We'll talk about this a little bit later. People that are experiencing poverty are kind of prone and primed to experience much higher rates and instances of trauma, but you can see there the statistics, 60% of all adults across the United States, this was from a very extensive study that was done in 2017, have experienced at least one instance of trauma in their lifetime. And those are just the instances that they can recall. There are definitely many instances of people experiencing trauma that it takes them years even to really dig through and understand that it's something that's having a lasting impact on their lives. So I wanted to kind of set our conversation in just sharing some statistics, many that you've likely heard before, but to just kind of ground us in this conversation about just how pervasive trauma is in our society today. So given a lot of the conversations that are going on the national level, thinking about the Me Too movement, still, even with all of the attention and the holding people accountable that's gone on in this space, still we have the troubling statistic that 1 in 3 women will experience sexual violence at some point in their lifetime. Again, thinking about whole family approaches and two-generation work, all of the many interventions that we're doing in this space and that other human service providers are doing, still, this year it's estimated that 1 in 4 children, a quarter of children in the United States, will experience some form of maltreatment this year. whether that's physical, sexual, emotional abuse. That can be, needing assistance with nutritional access, access to food, things like that. And also it can impact entire groups of people. So an interesting statistic that I found that I wanted to share was that Black Americans across different age groups, and I cut it out so it would fit on the slide, but also across socioeconomic levels, across the board, are more likely to be victims of serious violent crimes, and there are ramifications from that. But specifically thinking about trauma, that puts them at a much higher likelihood of suffering from some form of PTSD or chronic trauma-related illness in their lifetime. So already, just kind of setting the stage on our conversation, trauma is a very vast and wide occurrence across the United States. It's not just limited to people who are experiencing poverty. But as research continues to show, we see that this has a potentially devastating effect on our children. As I mentioned, 1 in 4 children will experience some specific type of trauma as it relates to, not getting the attention that they need. But the research is continuing to show across economic trends, across health trends even, all these different areas that children that experience this type of stress and trauma by the time they're 10 do consistently and almost exponentially in some regards poorer than other kids across their lifetime. So while, again, this is a pervasive problem, it's not just localized to people that are experiencing poverty. Children in particular that are in poverty, thinking about the stress, thinking about the different things that they might be exposed to just as a result of their environment that they're in, they face a much greater likelihood of experiencing abuse and neglect. And you can see here on the screen, rates of child abuse and neglect are 5 times higher for children in families with low socioeconomic status compared to children in families in higher levels of our society. So think about that. 5 times more likely to be exposed to something that's going to negatively impact them potentially across their lifespan. And adverse childhood experiences lead to poor health outcomes, so I mentioned that. So these chronic illnesses of obesity, diabetes, cancer, there's more stroke, heart attacks, all of these things the research is continuing to show are tied to a certain number of childhood experiences that people experience. So I think it's when people experience 3 or more ACEs, their likelihood to have a chronic health issue of those top 10, most deadly health issues that adults in the United States face go up exponentially with the amount of ACEs that they are exposed to when they're children. And one statistic that I thought was really troubling, but even just minor instances of trauma when children are exposed to constant states of stress, and if you think about it, the experience of poverty undoubtedly is a very stressful experience. It literally alters the chemical makeup of children's brains, particularly children 5 and under, to make them more likely to experience depression, substance abuse, and even suicide risk as adults. So it's not just adults that we're dealing with now, but future generations are potentially at stake thinking about this work. And as we think, again, looking at a lot of the conversations that are happening, in our society at this moment, the effects and impacts of structural and institutional racism are causing people of color to exist in an almost constant state of trauma. So there's been quite extensive research over the past 5 years that looks at defining racism actually in and of itself as a traumatic event. And I wanted to share some of the statistics that have come out of that body of research here on the screen, starting off with one that I mentioned before, but 1 in 10 Black Americans will develop a chronic trauma-related illness that can be directly tied to some of their experiences that they've had growing up. Thinking about prison reform and thinking about how Black Americans, or I will even say people of color, but Black and Latinx Americans across the board experience disproportionately high rates of incarceration and altercations with law enforcement. thinking about how stressful those interactions can be and what problems that can have for people, even if they're able to avoid being incarcerated. Just that in and of itself, those confrontations can be a lifelong traumatic event. And one statistic that is shocking, and I know it's something that's been a conversation, thankfully a lot that's happened on the national level, but I still don't think we're talking about it enough, is the extreme rates of violence that we're seeing being perpetrated against our Native women here in our society. So I'll read the statistic for us. More than 4 in 5 American Indian or Alaskan Native women, and more than 1 in 2 have experienced sexual violence. So over 80% of women in this demographic are experiencing some form of domestic violence at some point in their lifetime, and more than 1.5 of these women has experienced some form of sexual violence. These kinds of things are unacceptable for a lot of different reasons, but even thinking about how we can make sure that we're providing our services in a way that's reflective of this work, we have to be knowledgeable of, the issues that we're facing in our society. So even if that doesn't convince you on that level of, well, no one should have to deal with a lot of these things, why are these things persisting and going on in our society? Let's talk about the economic cost that results from trauma and the health outcomes and problems that we're seeing as a result. So you can see here in 2008, and this is a very outdated study, but this is the most recent one I could find that specifically looked at this issue. It cost us $124 billion to treat trauma-related illnesses. And you can see here that, that rivals the cost of other high-profile public health problems. But $124 billion was spent on addressing trauma-related illnesses in our country. And of course, the economic cost is great, but when we think about the human cost as well, when we think about people who are exposed to these issues, who are unable to achieve self-sufficiency, it's a critical issue, and it's something that we need to make sure that we are knowledgeable about and are working to address directly through our work in community action. So now that I've painted kind of that negative picture, now it's time to turn around and make it something positive. Given all of these things, given the impacts of trauma, given its extensive reach across all levels of our society, from individual to structural, across socioeconomic levels, what can we do? How can we make sure that we're doing our work in a way that is informed about this work and seeks to not re-traumatize people? So enter in trauma-informed approaches. And the importance of this work really kind of ties into the title of our conversation today, but really what it focuses in on is making sure that you shift the paradigm in your work in addressing your clients and even your staff. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but shifting your approach from what's wrong with you to what's happened to you. Understanding the impacts that trauma can have, understanding that a lot of times these instances of trauma relate to things that were out of someone's control. How can we provide our services? How can we engage our clients? How can we even physically structure the way that our agency looks and presents itself to our clients, to our staff, to make sure that they are provided a safe and empowering environment? And you ask that question, what happened to you, rather than what's wrong with you. So with that, I'm going to try to show you a short video that I think does a really good job of kind of setting the stage of this paradigm shift and why this work is important. This is specifically from the health services field, but again, I think it just sets up the conversation really well of why trauma-informed care is important. So I'm going to share my screen here, and you'll see my video in just a second. All right, here we go.
What the old saying, don't judge a book by its cover? Well, the same is true when you assess a patient. Hi, I'm Dr. Cruz. Early in my career, I noticed a pattern with some of my patients. They often had multiple health issues, were uneasy during office visits, and frequently visited the emergency department. But worst of all, they never got better despite multiple visits. Then I realized something. From an early age, many of my patients were exposed to trauma and adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. This includes emotional, sexual, or physical abuse, violence, neglect, discrimination, poverty, and other adverse events. ACEs are more common in the U.S. than you'd think. In fact, 60% of U.S. adults have one ACE, 25% have 3 or more ACEs, and 16% have 4 or more. ACEs occur in all socioeconomic groups, but are more common in low-income and minority populations. For young children, repeated exposure to trauma can impact brain development and literally rewire the brain's response to stress. So as they grow up, many struggle with issues related to emotional regulation, like depression, anxiety, or substance use disorders. Trauma survivors are also more often at risk for chronic diseases, behavioral health problems, and even suicide. Knowing all this, I began to rethink my approach to care. Instead of asking patients, "What's wrong with you?" I ask, "What happened to you?" Recognizing that life experiences are often a root cause of poor health is integral to improving patient care. Trauma-informed care has helped me take these experiences into account, providing greater insight into my patients' needs and how to address them. Here are 5 key ways that healthcare organizations can gradually integrate trauma-informed care into their practices to help patients and staff. First, build awareness and generate buy-in. Involve both staff and patients in adopting a trauma-informed approach. Second, invest in a trauma-informed workforce. Hire staff that embrace trauma-informed care and provide training not only for clinical staff, but also for non-clinical employees like front desk workers or security guards, who are often the face of your organization. Next, create an environment that is safe and welcoming for patients and staff. Engage patients in meaningful ways. Ask how they feel and listen. You can also build trust by involving them in their own treatment planning. Finally, identify and treat trauma. Consider a screening approach that works for your patients and ensure that treatments and referral sources are available. These changes take time, but each step improves our ability to connect with and care for patients. Today, our patients appreciate the changes we've made, plus our staff is more in tune with patients, so work is less stressful and more rewarding. Trauma-informed care. It can truly transform the caregiving experience from being treaters to being healers.
Okay, so give my camera a minute here to turn back on. All right, so like I said, I think that video does a very succinct and informed job of talking about why this work is important, and even just giving a glimpse into setting the stage on simple ways that you can begin to implement trauma-informed care in your work. But before we kind of jump into some of the strategies that we would recommend, I just want to give a more detailed overview of why it's important to be trauma-informed in your work. So outside of those statistics that I shared, some things that relate more specifically to our work in community action as to why we really need to be thinking about this work, why we really need to prioritize ensuring that we are trauma-informed in all of the services that we're providing to our customers. So, research over the last 15 years continues to unveil the deep interconnectedness of stress, health, and poverty. But to summarize some of these key points, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but trauma's impacts are simply just vastly expansive and unpredictable, and it can affect individuals in unique ways, and it can include a lot of different factors from age to gender, ethnicity, religion. And as we talked about in some of those structural and institutional barriers that people face, it can even upset entire groups of people at a time. And we already talked about that statistic, and again, it was reiterated in the video, that this is not something that's just localized to people that are experiencing poverty. 60% of U.S. adults have experienced at least one traumatic instance in their lifetime. And thinking about those health impacts, thinking about those health outcomes, this is a critical issue that we need to be more aware of and primed to address in our work. So next, again, I talked about it before, but zeroing in and continuing to set the stage, while this is not localized to people in poverty, people who are experiencing poverty are much more likely to experience instances of severe and extreme trauma. Research shows that living in poverty creates an abnormally high stress environment that greatly increases an individual's risk for physical and mental health issues across the lifespan. So much so that in 2016, the American Academy of Pediatrics, thinking about the constant stress of what it means to live in poverty, and thinking about what we talked about before about these potential impacts for children who are living in this state, that 3 years ago, they named poverty as the single most chronic health issue facing children in the United States. Also, when you think about why these two things tend to go with each other, poverty is often accompanied by low safety environments with crime, violence, and abuse simply occurring at higher rates than in more affluent areas. So again, that lends to that shifting that question of what's wrong with you to what happened to you. So many of these instances are the result of people being in circumstances that are so often out of their control, but it's providing them services in a way that recognizes that and seeks to address that in a positive and empowering way. And finally, trauma survivors simply need resources and support to better cope, but you have to know that you're dealing with instances of trauma in order to be able to effectively provide them with those resources and connect them with those services that they need to help them achieve self-sufficiency and stability in their lives. So we're going to go to the next slide. So something that I mentioned before, you should care about this work not just because it impacts your clients, but also because it has a very high likelihood that it's impacting your staff as well. Human service professionals face a very high risk of experiencing what we call compassion fatigue or secondhand trauma. And you can see here the definition on the screen. It's basically just an extreme state of tension as the result of, helping people that are experiencing issues of trauma. So by their very nature of wanting to be those healers, right, as they talked about in that video, of doing that work and helping people through these issues, they can then vicariously also be traumatized from that work as well. So it's important when engaging in trauma-informed care to think about this for the well-being not just of your clients and staff, which a lot of times is much easier for us to get our heads around, but also for your staff. Like your staff are, as a result of their working with people in this space, they are much more primed to experience trauma just as a result of being in this environment. So you have to make sure for the sustainability of your agency in all shapes and forms to make sure that you're thinking about this work and doing it in a way that is reflective of the needs of your clients and your staff. So, what does it really take to do this work? Let's see, we have a question in our conference. Let's see, compassion fatigue is also called vicarious trauma. Oh, that's great. Yeah, we definitely like to talk about this at the national level. We've had a couple of sessions where we talked about the importance of trauma-informed care, particularly as it relates to staff, why you need to do this work. So excited to hear that others are thinking about this and interested in it as well. But we definitely like to take those main stage opportunities to talk about this work and why it's important. So great, thank you. But what does it take to do this work, right? Knowing that trauma is so pervasive, knowing that it can, impact the sustainability of your work both inside and outside of your agency, what can CAP agencies do to make sure that they're providing their services and also creating an environment for their staff in a way that does not seek to re-traumatize and seeks to positively address trauma? So you can see here, those are agencies that, one, realize that trauma-informed care is important, realize what trauma is, recognize triggers or potential situations that might engage or bring up instances of trauma. You respond to the specific symptoms and occurrences of trauma that you're seeing with your clients and staff, and you resist all known opportunities or risks of potentially exposing people to trauma or re-triggering past traumatic events. So that's what we like to call the 4 R's of trauma-informed care. So you realize, you recognize, you respond, and you resist. So let's get a little bit more into the details of how to achieve each of these 4 R's. So when it comes to implementation in this work, we kind of created a simple checklist here, and again, we'll get into the details of some ideas or approaches that you can do to make sure you're achieving these ends. But first and foremost, you want to make sure that you're creating a safe environment. Again, not just for your clients, but also for your staff. And thinking about, in all regards, that word environment, that can even be the physical layout of your office, that can be the culture of your office as well, but making sure that you provide an environment that does not seek to traumatize in any way. Supporting staff development. Again, helping staff to understand the importance of trauma-informed care. You can always learn more about this topic as you just learn. You see that trauma has a very broad definition. There's so many instances and so many ways that people can experience trauma. So making sure that your staff are engaged and aware of the research that's coming out, of maybe even helping to recognize instances and symptoms of trauma amongst themselves. Again, to contribute to that environment of safety and well-being for everyone that sets foot in the door of your organization. Making sure that you have some kind of process to screen, assess, and plan for services. So it's not just enough to know that people are experiencing trauma, but actually having a plan in place so that you can seek to address it when those things come up. Again, in a trauma-informed way, a way that doesn't seek to re-traumatize people. You can adapt your policies and procedures, right? So again, thinking about any parts of your staff culture, of your internal culture as an organization that might be making people feel othered or might be contributing to some instances of trauma, making sure that you take a look at your policies so that there's no underlying pathways for trauma to kind of get in there and derail the work that you're doing. And this one is critically important, but ensuring that not just your customers, but also your staff have the ability to actively input the ways in which you are engaging in trauma-informed care. So this is not just something that you kind of set from on high and say, this is how you will engage in trauma-informed care, but really letting your customers and also your staff being active participants in the implementation, the design, and continued updates that are needed to your trauma-informed care approach. So let's talk a little bit more about each of these different items on our checklist here. So facilitating and creating a safe and open environment. So throughout your organization, your priority in trauma-informed care should be that everyone, again, clients and staff, children or adults, feel physically and physiologically safe in the receipt of services and setting foot in the door of your organization. And for staff, this generally means maximizing control over their service environment. And particularly, this means providing space for your staff to practice self-care. So again, so they don't have that compassion fatigue or that vicarious trauma, so they're not bringing that into their work. As they're dealing with clients and they're dealing with customers, giving them that space that they need to address the trauma that they themselves are experiencing just by the very nature of seeking to help people that are experiencing poverty and other folks that are coming into your agency to receive services. So making sure first and foremost that you are consciously and consistently contributing to the maintenance of a safe environment for everyone. So clients and staff, parents and children, young and old, that people feel like they have some kind of measure of control to regard their safety as it relates to your work with them and just them being in your space at your organization. So staff development and support. Providing multiple avenues for your staff to address the emotional stress that can arise when working with individuals who have had traumatic experiences. And the video kind of touched on this, but making sure that all staff, so not just your frontline staff, not just your caseworkers, not just your case managers, but all staff. That can be people who are working with you on your transportation services that you might be providing. That can be your board members as they're engaging in conversations, in the community. That can be all levels of your staff. get some kind of at least baseline training of what trauma-informed care is. Because if you're going to contribute back to that first point of maintaining a safe environment, everyone has to be consistently and consciously contributing to the maintenance of that environment, knowing that trauma is something that exists, and it's something that can potentially be triggered as a result of the way that you're providing services and interacting with your clients. So prioritizing training staff and also giving them the opportunity to maybe even share and explore trauma that they might be experiencing themselves. We'll talk a little bit later about some assessment tools that can be provided, but often in this work, we've recommended that agencies actually start their training, not just, kind of by listing off with people what trauma is, but just having your staff come together, whether it's across departments, or if you're able to get everybody together all at once, just to engage in a trauma-informed self-assessment. So talking about experiences in your own life that might count as trauma. And thinking about the ways that, you might bring that to your work, or the ways that that's manifesting itself in your life. Starting with that kind of just opens people's eyes, again, to the pervasiveness of trauma and also why this work is so important, and empowering them to have that conversation that will, of course, then empower and encourage them to be able to deal with their clients in a different way. And again, thinking back to that main question, not what's wrong with you, but what has happened to you. So it's a little bit hard to read here. I apologize for that, but you'll get a copy of the slides once we're done, so you can see this and go through it in detail. This was actually adapted from another infographic that was provided. You can see her credentials there on the screen. But I thought it would be important as we're engaging this conversation just to take a minute to touch on the importance of compassion fatigue, or that vicarious trauma. And why it's important, and thinking about how that might manifest itself. So again, you're thinking about that question of not what's wrong with you. If you see your staff kind of exhibiting any of these signs or issues or things, not what's wrong with you, like what's your problem today, but what happened to you? What experiences, what work have you been doing? What things are going on in your personal life that might be contributing to you responding in this way? This is important to kind of recognize these signs. Again, first and foremost, you don't want them to bring that into their work inadvertently, as they're working with clients, but also for their own self-care. You want to make sure that your employees are coming into your office happy and engaged and ready and willing to do the work. And compassion fatigue is a real threat to that mental and physical health for your staff. So just making sure that even if you have this posted somewhere in your break room, or even just sending this out in an email, just letting folks know even that this is something that happens, and maybe if they're experiencing any of these signs, giving them that space to engage in a conversation, giving them that space even if it's possible to maybe step away and reset, so that they're not in any way contributing to bringing trauma into your work. Thinking about that compassion fatigue then, it's also very important to make sure that you are consistently, again, and consciously contributing to an environment where staff are able to be resilient. So by the very nature of this work, it is stressful sometimes. Hearing about all of the different things that people have to manage and engage in, just to make ends meet. Sometimes listening to that, even in itself, is a stressful experience. But thinking about working more deeply with people to actually help to get them out of those circumstances to achieve self-sufficiency, that in and of itself will create some kind of tension, some kind of stress for your staff. So making sure that you are aware and provide outlets and opportunities for staff just to have a chance to express those experiences of trauma, and then to re-engage and rebuild, again, so that they can come into their work happy and engaged. So maintaining an environment of care that addresses, minimizes, but also treats that secondary traumatic stress and increases their resilience and their ability to bounce back, and to have those opportunities to express, and again, to bring that positive enforcement into their work. And this doesn't have to be very difficult. I gave you here some things that you can do to help to maintain this kind of culture of resilience amongst your staff, but you can start with a trauma-informed self-assessment. Again, a lot of agencies have found that very impactful just when people are kind of, well, why do we need to do this? Or you even start to kind of broach the conversation that you might have to change the way that, that your intake process is going with clients if you want to do some of this kind of screening work. Just taking a staff meeting or taking maybe, a staff development day just to engage in a trauma-informed self-assessment, to let people see that, wow, I've experienced trauma, and think about how they might be, again, inadvertently bringing that to their work. That really helps to set the stage for staff of all levels to see why this work is important, and also just to engage in a conversation that in whatever way they might have been dealing with something, that they're not alone in facing those instances of trauma. So that's always a great place to start. Again, continued training as more research is coming out of how trauma impacts people across the lifespan, how it has an impact on specific factors and outcomes in people's lives, just providing staff the opportunity to be connected with that research. It can just be an email that you send out. It doesn't have to be a whole formal training. You don't have to bring somebody in. It's just if you happen to maybe see something or hear something on NPR about trauma and its impacts, sharing that with your staff so that they have the opportunity to engage in that work. Again, to see that this is something that's important, to see the ways that it manifests itself in people's lives, and to see how it ties into our work as human service providers. Providing safe spaces in your office, so having that one person or that one area where someone is really just kind of they literally can't today, they have that space or that person to go and express their frustration, again, so that they're not traumatized, they're not bringing that work, that trauma into their work with clients, but they have an outlet, a healthy outlet to kind of get that out. Or even just having a happy hour, having an opportunity for your staff to just go and kind of talk to each other, to be able to release stress, even in that really informal way, goes a long way towards the maintenance of resilience amongst your staff. So let's see, I got some questions in, so I'll pause. Let's see, would it be helpful to include this in an organizational culture assessment? Absolutely. This could be a really underlying part of your organizational culture that you might not have been aware of. And when we get to that conversation on adapting policies and procedures, this is actually a really good place to identify if there are any policies or procedures that are triggering people, that are causing people to experience trauma, again, both for your clients but also for your staff. So that's a great way to kind of engage people in this conversation of, what trauma looks like within your organization, and you have to know that if you're going to take concrete steps to address it in your work. So that's a great question. And let's see, there's another comment. Yeah, that's a great comment. So someone shared, promoting substance use-free zones for resilience can help build a supportive culture for those in recovery. It's a great contribution, so thank you. But definitely just providing those safe space zones for people to kind of engage in this work, to be acknowledged that, they might have problems, but in an unjudged way, really goes a long way towards, making sure that you're not re-traumatizing people. So kind of just what we were talking about. Thinking about ways to include screening, assessment, and then the resulting service planning as it relates to trauma-informed care. But just ensure that in some way trauma-informed screening and assessment is accessible to all of your clients. And I know that that's oftentimes easier said than done, but I'll share some resources at the end of this presentation. But this can literally be just 5 questions that you ask folks. This can take 2 or 3 minutes. Added on to, or maybe even incorporated into your intake process that you're already doing, but just making sure that you have the opportunity to know from the very outset of what instances of trauma people might be experiencing, because that should inform the way that you're providing them services, that should inform the referrals that you're making for them, that should inform the services that you connect them to, and how you might need to do that. So it's very important to make sure that you think about in some way engaging in a screening assessment of clients' experience of trauma as they're receiving services through your organization. And then also, I'll talk about that second point, when we think about making sure that people, creating an environment where people feel like they have control over what's happening to them, not kind of like taking that information, filling it out on a form and then filing it away for them to never see again, But as much as they're comfortable, as much as they are willing, using that information with clients to then build and, asset development related goals and plans. So something that they are actively contributing towards, and not just us telling them how they need to do things or how they need to fix things, but engaging with them in a conversation, knowing, again, what's happened to them and how they can actively seek to address those things in their life as they receive and pursue other services from your organization or within your collaborative in your community. And then a little bit more on assessment and planning. So when you're doing this work, you can't just kind of Google it and see the top result and be, okay, we're going to use this one. Before you engage in any kind of implemented assessment process, you need to make sure that you are aware and knowledgeable of culturally and just appropriate evidence-informed assessments that specifically relate to the clientele or your staff, but that specifically relate to the customers that you're going to be serving. You really need to engage in a conversation, and again, that's why it's really important to maybe do that internal assessment first, so you have an idea to make sure that everyone's on the same page of what you're even talking about, but so you can engage in those conversations about maybe some common themes that you're seeing amongst your clients, or maybe target populations that seem to be experiencing trauma at higher rates than others in your community. But making sure that you really do that legwork and engage in a conversation in thinking about culturally appropriate means of assessment and screening in your work. So very important to make sure that you consider that. And also providing resources. So making sure, yes, that you are providing your services in a way that is knowledgeable, that people that are coming in to receive services likely have experienced some form of trauma, but making sure that additional resources just for their own empowerment and learning are available to them, regardless of who comes in, just helping people, again, to understand the importance of trauma, and its impact and how widespread it is really helps to contribute to people not feeling alone in this space and helps them to be more open and receptive to this work. And you really need people to be open and receptive in this work for it to work. So it's very important. And again, allowing them to have an active role in the receipt, but also of this information, but also how the information that they might share with you is used in the way that you're providing services to others, the way that you're working specifically with that client in the development of their goals. So now let's talk a little bit about those policies and procedures and how once you kind of know what trauma-informed care is, you've engaged in a conversation internally about, how trauma seems to be showing itself in the work that you're doing, both with your clients and with your staff. How can you take steps to make sure that your policies and procedures reflect your commitment to this trauma-informed care work? So making sure that they are written down, it's not just something that you kind of talk about up here, and it's not just a higher level conversation, but also making sure that it's accessible to your staff as well. That's a very critical point. But making sure that explicitly trauma is stated in your policies and procedures as it relates to some of this work, and expressing a continued written, again, and accessible commitment to reducing re-traumatization and promoting well-being and recovery for clients and staff. And it can include a focus on issues of safety and confidentiality, again, contributing to that environment of safety that is paramount in this work, and making sure that all of your policies relating to your staff demonstrate a commitment to providing services, support, training, whatever they need to make sure that they are able to do this work in the most impactful way. And also, I've touched on this a little bit before, but we can never say it enough, so I'm going to keep saying it, but making sure that you find ways to actively engage your clients and your staff that have experienced trauma in this work. So you want them to have a seat at the table, not just as recipients of services or not just trauma survivors, but as experts in what it's going to take to address the trauma that you're seeing in your community. But people with those lived experiences should have the opportunity to provide feedback and be active and engaged participants in the implementation, design, and dissemination of your work as it relates to your trauma-informed focus and what you're doing. And again, staff members should consistently help your clients identify strategies that will contribute to them feeling comfortable and empowered in their receipt of services through your organization. Very important, making sure that you engage clients and staff, but any kind of trauma survivor in how you are providing these services and how you're doing this work. So a little bit more, if you want some more concrete resources on how you can think about trauma-informed care and what it looks like, specifically in community action, 2 years ago we actually released a case study where we looked at 3 community action agencies across the country who participated with us in a trauma-informed learning community group that said, we're kind of on the very verge of understanding trauma and what it is, but we want to work to make sure that we have an organizational culture that is knowledgeable of what trauma is and that we develop kind of a service delivery strategy that relates to not traumatizing clients or staff. So this is a great resource for you all that's available under our resource library. There you can see the link there and the path to follow to get to it. But I would definitely recommend, if you're interested in specific outcomes and the processes, the biggest lessons learned, the biggest barriers that were faced for community action agencies in this work, I would definitely check this piece out. Something that was interesting is that we also had a state participant in this work. So thinking about engaging in this work from the state level, we had someone from a state-level Department of Health and Human Services thinking about how they can provide this work and how they can work with both community action agencies, but in general, health services, health providers and human service providers in their state to make sure that they had some kind of common understanding of trauma-informed care in their work. So Courtney was gracious enough, thank you Courtney, to share the link in the chat so you can check that out there. But that's one of our resources that we would recommend. In terms of some other implementation and practice guides, just in general, that go much more into the weeds than we have time to today on what trauma-informed care is, some of those more nuanced topics that you need to be focusing in on, and how you can kind of go about operationalizing some of this work. You can find those there. All of these, again, are available on our resource library, on the partnership website. If you go to Innovative Practices, you'll see Trauma-Informed Care as one of the drop-down menu options. You can find it there. And also here are some assessment tools. So if you want some more guidance or some template examples of what that assessment can look like, both self-assessments and assessments that you might be able to use with your clients, you can definitely check these resources out. And then some screening tools, so kind of what that screening process looks like. Again, different templates, different ideas, different thought processes behind what this process can, should, and should not look like. You can find some of those resources there. I'll specifically call out the second one, the one from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, their Trauma-Informed Care Behavioral Services. That is a huge, 300-page protocol document that goes into different instances of trauma-informed care, how you can operationalize that in your work. That is a great resource. I know it's a few years old now, but it's a great resource, and we consistently recommend that to CAP agencies that come to us with questions about this work. It's a great resource. And I'll also point out the second one there on the screen. If you're not like a big reader, or maybe you just want to think about different ways to engage your staff in this conversation. That third one there's actually 2 videos that show you what that screening process might look like if you're talking with both a child and also an adult, to assess not just if they've experienced trauma, but to get into the different types of trauma that they might have experienced, because that will have a direct impact on the way that you engage with them and the services that you might refer them to. So that's very important. So I will pause now to see if there are any questions, comments, or thoughts that you all might have for me. I will pause to say that, again, today's webinar will be recorded, and a copy of the slides will be made available following today's event, so you'll get to see all of the resources that we talked about to go through all of the different points. But I wanted to pause and see if there were any questions that you all might have had for me. Just checking the chat here to see if there are any questions. Maybe I can share them with the group. Okay. If not, I'll give you my contact information where you can reach out to me following today's event, or as I'm going through some of our closing slides, if you think of something and you'd like to share it with the group, feel free to send it in the chat, and we'll take a minute to address it and share that with the group. So if you have any questions, type them in as I go through some of our final slides for today. But I want to thank you all so much for your intention in joining us in this conversation. It's a really important conversation, and it by no means is easy work, but it's very important work, and just by showing up today, that shows your commitment to even just learning about this work, which is very important. So I want to thank you for that. Let's see, is this video available? It will be once we're done with the webinar. Once we finish up today, we'll get it posted. You can definitely expect to see that later this week, the recording from today's event. So some other things that we're doing here at the partnership that we're really excited about and we want to direct your attention to, we are part of the Census 2020 Count Me In efforts, and we have recently launched our webpage on our website. We are currently in the process, some of my other wonderful colleagues are engaging in in-person trainings, we're developing a video series, we're doing publications, we're doing whatever we can to make sure that community action agencies are ready, prepped, and able to get out the count for 2020. We know this is an incredibly important census that's coming up in the next year, particularly for those hard-to-reach communities that so often community action is the only one that has a really good reach into. So please check that page out if you're interested. We're actually going to be facilitating a webinar similar to this one that we're doing today later this month talking about this effort. You can find more information for that on our website. But please make sure that you are prepared to engage with us in this work. We are calling on you guys to help us get out the count, to make sure that people in need in your communities get, a fair representation and allotment of the services that they need to achieve self-sufficiency. So join us in this work. And a question came in, do I know of any trauma-informed beginning trainings for staff? Yes, so some of those resources that I shared, particularly looking at those self-assessments, there were one or two that I shared on the slide earlier. That's a great place to start. I'm going to see if I can pull up the specific name for you so you can be really guided in your efforts in getting to it. Let's see. So there is one, again, it's from SAMHSA, and it's called the Trauma-Informed Organizational Toolkit. It talks about, that one is specifically related towards actually serving homeless populations, but that resource has been very valuable for many of the agencies that participated with us in our trauma-informed learning community group that we facilitated 2 years ago. This one is available on our website, but that resource just has a lot of templates and a lot of different assessment approaches. It kind of weighs the pros and cons of each, but really kind of gets into the need of why trauma-informed care is important and the different ways that you can engage in those conversations with your staff. So I would recommend that resource. And again, the link is provided in the slides, which will be shared following today's event. So, as I mentioned, all of these resources and more are available under our resource library on our website. If you go to Tools and Resources, Resource Library, you'll see our great big list of different topic areas, not just trauma-informed care, but pretty much everything that we focus on as it relates to our training and technical assistance work here at the partnership. You can check that out. There's plenty of our resources and also some from external partners, things like that. But check that out if you want to learn more about anti-poverty approaches in this work of community action. I also want to recommend another resource, our Community Action Academy, that we facilitate free of charge. I'll say it again, free of charge for you guys to go on and take online courses to connect with some of these specific topic areas but more broadly to engage with this work of community action in a self-paced, kind of self-designed way as it relates to learning. It's actually available for you to access traditionally by logging in through your browser, but you can also actually download the app, which I believe is also free too. But once you create your login there, you can even take this learning on the go. So wherever you are, you can kind of stay engaged with us in this work. So some of the on-demand e-courses that we have available now, you can see here on the screen. We're still working on developing many more, including one specifically on trauma-informed care. We're kind of in the stages of getting that ready to go for you guys, so we'll definitely get an announcement out once that's ready. But you can see the ones that we have available so far, just to get a taste of kind of what we talk about in the learning community, and also so that you can engage more deeply with these topic areas. So definitely check those out. Again, they're free, and you can access that at moodle.communityactionpartnerships.com. So shameless plug for our upcoming annual convention. It'll be taking place the last week of August in Chicago, Illinois. We are very excited for the conversations that we are going to be facilitating at this event. We hope that many of you are planning to join us, and we look forward to seeing you there. I think today is the last day for early bird registration, so if you want to snag that discount price, make sure that you go to our website. You'll see it there. I think it's on the main page. You can find access to how to register for this event. And again, go ahead and mark your calendars. So next year's Management and Leadership Training Conference in January will be taking place in San Juan, Puerto Rico. We are very excited to have this opportunity to continue to engage in this work. When you think about being a voice for opportunity, but to give ourselves as a network the opportunity to be in touch, to be in community with our fellow citizens in Puerto Rico. We are very excited for that opportunity, and we hope that many of you will be able to join us for what is sure to be a very impactful event. Here you can see some of our upcoming webinars. You joined us today for one installment of our Webinar Wednesday series, but we invite you to come back and join us for the rest of the month. You can see some of the things that we're going to be talking about. We actually have a slight change that came through just as we were getting started today. Next week's webinar is actually going to be an introduction to Community Action Month. As you all know, today is the first day of Community Action Month, and we're really excited to celebrate 55 years of our work in community action. So Denise Harlow is actually going to engage us in a conversation on some of the things that we're thinking about this year and ways that you can engage with us and continue to get out the word to celebrate over half a century of community action. Also, you can see some of the other conversations we're going to be having there, thinking about piloting and prototyping, thinking about data collection and analysis, one that just got confirmed that's not up here, but specifically talking about our efforts with the 2020 census. A lot of exciting conversations that are going to be taking place this month. Make sure that you join us for these conversations. And last but certainly not least, here is the contact information for the Learning Communities Resource Center team. You can see mine there, second under Tiffany, but if you have questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, please feel free to reach out to anybody that you see listed here on the screen. We'll do our best to help you get sorted out. We do respond to those emails, I promise, don't be shy. We will take the time to respond to you. We very much value your thoughts and efforts with us in this work. But with that, we are going to conclude today's webinar presentation. Thank you all so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time, either online, and we look forward to seeing many of you join us in Chicago later this summer. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.